I lead worship at a small church, and in my experience, sometimes it can be very discouraging and isolating. 85% of churches in North America have less than 200 people in attendance, so I know I'm not alone in feeling this. In this video, I'm excited to bring you my interview with Spencer Cormany as he shares 5 tips for leading worship in a small church. Now let's roll the intro. Hey, what's up? It's Jake with churchfront.com, an online resource for innovative and creative church leaders. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel so you receive all of our latest content to help you grow yourself and grow your church. While YouTube is one of my favorite platforms, I also host a podcast called the Churchfront Podcast, and I linked the podcast below. And on the podcast, I feature amazing guests who have lots of insightful things to share about church ministry and leadership, specifically about worship and creative ministry. In this video, I want to share with you my interview with Spencer Cormany. He is with Leading Worship Well. It's an Instagram account. I highly recommend you go follow it. Spencer is creating high quality daily content for worship leaders on Instagram. He has obviously an image that he posts, but underneath the image, he has really insightful, like what I would call micro blogs that are gonna help you in your worship ministry. Spencer also focuses much of his content on helping worship leaders who are in smaller churches. So if you are at a smaller church, which is what most of us are, I'm at a smaller church. 85% of churches in North America are smaller churches with less than 200 in attendance. Then you're going to find Spencer's Instagram feed very valuable. I'm very picky about Instagram feeds that I follow. I kind of only want ones that are going to deliver consistent value to me. So that's why I highly recommend you click the link in the description and go follow Spencer's Instagram account. And while you're at it, while you're on Instagram, you can follow me at Churchfront. In my interview with Spencer that we had for the Churchfront podcast, I thought it'd be fun to capture the video and also share that with you here on YouTube. YouTube is my favorite social content creation platform. Don't tell anybody. Even though I don't mind Instagram and Facebook, YouTube, there's just something unique about it. And I appreciate you being a subscriber. And since I really appreciate you being a subscriber, I want to make sure you're getting all the quality content that I'm creating for Churchfront. That's why I wanted to put this long form interview on the channel, as well as some other long form interviews that you may have noticed if you've been watching the channel for the past few months. If you're like, Jake, I love your content, but I don't have time to watch this whole interview, just click the link below and you can listen to it while you do your chores or go for a walk or set up gear at your church. In this interview, Spencer shares 5 tips for leading worship at a small church. I know what it's like being a worship leader at a small church. It's frustrating because a lot of the times our dreams and goals and aspirations exceed our resources and budget and manpower. And it's also easy to compare ourselves to other larger church ministries. I know I've done this before in the past, and it can just really lead you to kind of a dark and depressing place as a worship leader. So I think you're going to appreciate this honest conversation that Spencer and I have, as well as giving you some practical tips to really make the most out of whatever worship leading context you're in, especially if you're in a season of leading worship at a smaller church. Regardless of the size of your church and your ministry, you are making a huge impact for the kingdom of God and for the Big C Church. So keep up the great work. And without further ado, I hope you enjoy my interview with Spencer Cormany with Leading Worship Well. Spencer Cormany, welcome to the Churchfront podcast.
Hey, thanks, man. It's good to be here.
Dude, I've been loving your Instagram account at Leading Worship Well, and it's just a great way to get some daily dose of worship leading tips. And I was really glad we connected a couple weeks back, and I just love connecting with other worship leaders who are also creating content in the online world to help out other worship leaders. And I'm excited to collaborate with you today on this podcast session. But before we dive into our session, why don't you go ahead and just introduce yourself to the Churchfront community. Tell us where you're at, where you're serving, and just a little bit about your story of your call to ministry and why you're so passionate about worship ministry. So go ahead and just introduce yourself.
Yeah, well, my name's Spencer Cormany. I'm currently serving at Merge Community Church in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. That's like 20 minutes. I keep talking to people, and I always say it's 20 minutes away from Gettysburg, which is like a famous battle. So
hopefully they know of Gettysburg if you're listening from the
I don't
United
know.
States.
Like, I know about it because I live close to it, but I don't know like if you in Colorado know about it. So I serve there, and just a little bit about my story. And I was thinking about this, and I feel like this story is going to be an encouragement to someone because of just like the patience that it took to get even to where I'm at today. So I want to kind of go back to the beginning.
Yeah.
And so my story starts out, I grew up in the church my whole life. And when I was about 13, my family started this contemporary worship service at my church. Growing up, it was always traditional. My family was like, all right, well, contemporary music is getting more popular. So they started that, and my whole family was on the worship team, except for me. My mom played keyboard, my brother played bass, my dad and my sister sang, and I sat out in the chairs and watched them practice all the time. So I did that for like a year and a half until a year in, my dad finally brought home this guitar, and it wasn't for my birthday, and it wasn't for any special occasion. I think he honestly got it for himself because it was a Kiss guitar. Do you know the band Kiss?
Oh, yeah.
And it had this huge face of Paul Stanley in full makeup on it. So that was my very first guitar. And I learned on that Paul Stanley guitar. I'd sit in my room for like 3 to 4 hours every day and just play guitar. And I did that for like a year and a half. Then finally I got to a point where I could join the worship team that my family had started. And I started learning more from there. So fast forward a few more years, senior year of high school, for different reasons, they needed a worship team leader. And they somehow decided to entrust me, a 17-year-old, to be the worship team leader. It was called the praise team coordinator. I put that in air quotes if you're listening on the podcast, because I don't know if I was too young to be considered a worship leader or worship pastor or whatever, but that was my job in high school. Saved up all my money from that job to buy a Taylor 214 CE acoustic guitar when I graduated, and that's the guitar I use today.
Which was 214, you said?
214 CE,
Nice.
yep.
Nice. Yep.
That's what I could afford making whatever I made as the praise team coordinator. So from there, I headed to Millersville, and I thought I was going to get into recording, engineering, stuff like that. And while I was at Millersville, I served with the campus ministry pretty much every Sunday, a freshman leading everyone else in worship. It was an amazing experience. Those people poured into me and helped me realize that I wanted to be a full-time worship pastor. So after a year at Millersville, moved back home, started attending Liberty University online while serving at a local church. And I got a lot of good experience from that. And through like those 2-3 years of serving there, I eventually graduated, and I walked up to my pastor one day after I graduated and said, "Hey, I'm graduated now, and I really want to be a worship pastor." And he said, "Let me run some numbers." And 5 minutes later, he's like, "Let's make it happen." And it was just like perfect timing, because this was a church plan. It had only been around for like 5 years. And right as I graduated, we moved into that period of like, okay, now we need to think about like full-time staffing. So it was just amazing how God put that in front of me, like at the perfect time, and that patience of sitting in the chairs, watching my whole family on stage lead worship every Sunday, and like patiently waiting through that, and then patiently working for 3 to 4 hours a day to learn guitar. And just over and over again, patience and patience led me to where I'm at today. So that's my story.
Yeah, dude, we do have a lot of parallels in our story. I mean, for me, it was like I was the one sitting and watching worship services when I was young, and my brother was playing drums in the worship band. This is when I was like in grade school, and then they needed a bass player, so learning bass guitar was my first instrument, and that's what got me into it. Yeah, bass. I think it's such a great first instrument because it's easy enough that you're not going to get discouraged. Like you can. Pretty much anybody can learn how to play bass starting off, and then but obviously you can grow in your skill and become a really amazing bass player with lots of technical skills and talent and stuff. And then it was in high school, like about 16, 17. That's when I picked up an electric or an acoustic guitar for the first time, and literally I kind of stumbled into it. I wanted to lead a youth worship band. at my church, and then my pastor saw us practicing one time, and we were horrible. But he's like, "Hey, you should do that on Sundays." And then it's like,
Can I ask you what your youth worship band team's name was?
gosh, I think it was called Falling Forward. I think I have vague memories of the name, but I think
I
it's
always
like,
find those names funny.
yeah. I'm pretty sure that was that was our name. It's funny. I have not thought about that in like, I don't know, how long has it been? 10 years now? Yeah.
My band's name was Ichthys. So
It was what?
Ichthys. It's like the Greek name for the Jesus fish.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Ichthys. Yeah, pretty sweet.
That's pretty rad, bro. Maybe sometime, maybe Ichthys can come open for Falling Forward someday.
That's right. Yeah. What a show that would be.
What a show. Oh my gosh. But yeah, man, it's cool. It's cool how God takes like our interests and passions at a young age and develops those over time. And, then next thing you know, you're leading a worship ministry. And I think that's like another kind of a side note. It's like whenever we see younger leaders in our church or younger folks with interest in worship ministry, it's so important to pour into them and develop them. So, well, today, the topic of conversation we have is leading worship at a small church. And I'm pretty sure, statistically speaking, most of the listeners of this podcast are not worship leaders at mega churches. And if they are, that's great. And that's awesome. Church growth is a great thing. We want churches to grow, to reach more people and advance God's kingdom. The case is that most churches, though, in North America and actually in the world, consist of smaller congregations of less than 200 people. Maybe it's even more, less than 100 people. I myself right now, I'm at a brand new church plant, and we are at now we're at 60 adults in attendance, and then maybe another like 20 or 30 kids in kids ministry. So we haven't even hit 100 people yet. And that's just sort of the common case for a lot of churches. It's like, hey, and for a lot of worship leaders, like a lot of worship leaders I meet, like they're worship leaders at churches with smaller attendance. And sometimes, to be honest and to be frank, like sometimes it's easy for us to get really just discouraged about the size of our church, the size of our ministries. It's easy to look at other churches that are large and, flourishing growth wise, and just kind of get down about it. Like we, especially now in the age of like social media and being able to see like people posting videos or photos about, hey, we had like 1 billion people in attendance at our 100 services or whatever,
Over
it's like
1,000 campuses. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, cause also too, then sometimes with like bigger church size means more resources. And then it's just hard because it's like, a church can barely afford to buy multi-tracks, or even just barely afford to have in-ear monitoring or just some of these other pieces of gear that would be huge in our ministry. I think I'm really excited about today's conversation because I know I've struggled with like, just like, how do I navigate leading worship in a small ministry at a small church, but still have a bigger picture view of really how I am contributing to God's kingdom and to the Big C Church. And I think Spencer has a lot of valuable insight to share in this area. And, I noticed this, Spencer, just looking at following your Instagram account, and just, you have these great posts that you're making every day. And I just wanted to really share some of that here on the podcast. So let's work through these. What you have are these 5 tips for leading worship in a small church. So I'm just going to let you go ahead, and we're gonna walk through each of these. So how about you go ahead and let's start with this first tip.
Yeah. Before we get into that,
yeah,
I just want to put a little more context around like this conversation that we're going to have, because I was thinking about like what I'm trying to do with leading worship well. And to go back to your point, most churches are smaller, and I was looking up statistics, and 85% of churches in North America average less than 200 people in attendance. So like so often, like you were saying, we look on social media and we see all these huge churches and we think like, oh, every other single church is that big. But like that's not the case. 85% of churches in North America are under 200. So I also want to say at the top of this, like I'm not against big churches. Like, I love big churches. I love medium-sized churches. I love small churches. I love all churches in general. But simply put, I think that I have a heart for the small church worship leader because I'm one of them. And as I consumed content and started looking around the internet, I kept seeing all of this stuff that was from larger church perspectives to a larger church audience. And I found myself having to constantly go through like these mental gymnastics of, this is really good information. How's it apply to me? And so with leading worship well, I started thinking of this idea like, why are we putting the burden on the majority to do that? And what if there's a way for me, because I can only control myself, what if there's a way for me to specifically equip those small church leaders where they don't have to think like, well, what's this have to do with what I'm doing at my church? And they can just be like, that's exactly where I'm at. So with that idea in mind, I'm ready to jump into the 5 tips. Are you?
I'm totally ready, and thanks for framing that even more in kind of your heart behind leading worship well, because that really comes out and helping equip folks like kind of where they're at, and that's like you said, that's the case for 85% of probably the worship leaders even listening to this podcast. So let's go ahead and dive into those tips.
Yeah. All right. Number 1 for leading worship in a small church is really, it's about a mindset, and it's to embrace the season that you're in. And I think that this is important because I think God wants to show everybody something wherever they are. He wants to show you something in whatever season that you're in. And so the question becomes, are you listening and learning, or are you just complaining? Because I don't know about you, Jake, but sometimes it's easy to just complain and not actually like take in the experience that we have. And it's so easy for us to get trapped into this idea that our value and our ability as a worship leader is related to the size of the congregation that we're leading. Pretty much what you were talking about before. And we know that that's not true, but it's something that small church leaders always struggle with, I think. And I know some amazing small church leaders who lead worship in a small church, and they may always lead in a small church, and they're fine with that because their quote-unquote win looks differently, which I think is part of the conversation of embracing the season. So this is sort of a 2-part tip. First of all, just embrace and enjoy the season that God has put you in wherever you are. But then to help you do that, also evaluate what your win is whenever it comes to worship leading. And I don't know if you saw my post, I put it out this week. It was all about clarifying your win when it comes to like the actual worship leading process. But I think it's also applicable from like a career standpoint. And I use that term loosely because I know some of us are volunteers, but like just a career worship leading, like where do you want to be in 20 years? And so what's your worship leading win from a holistic perspective? And I think the scary part is that a lot of us will never admit it and we'll never say it out loud, but a lot of us think that to win, we have to lead as many people as we possibly can. Like somehow there's a difference between leading 13 people at a Bible study on a Wednesday night and leading 2,000 people on a Sunday morning. And like, what if we shifted our win from that to just simply leading the people that God placed in front of us to the best of our ability? And we ask the question, did I lead to the best of my ability, not just in my time of leading, but like in my preparation and in my prayer and all the things that go into worship leading? So that's what I think of when I think of embracing the season. And when we redefine our win, it helps us embrace that season a little bit better.
Yeah, you know that when I've been in situations like where I was just complaining about the ministry that I was leading and I was in because of the size issue. And especially for me, I'm a big visionary dreamer. I like to build things, grow things, and it's tough for me, especially being in environments where that's just not happening, you know. And and I was in a church one time where all this stuff was really coming to a head, I feel like, and I was kind of making a decision of like, do I even do this anymore? Like, is it even worth the frustration that it's causing me? And like, it just it was months and months of like wrestling through this with my wife, and eventually one thing that really breathed life into me in that context and situation was like you said, focusing on the wins and what that looked like in my own development as a worship leader. And for me, that was a couple things. So like I just a lot of like, there's some practical things about my worship leading. I'm like, you know what? I think I need to work on like memorizing my music. So I don't have to be looking at a music stand during the worship service. I can be really looking at the congregation, and really actually just kind of like focusing on worshiping God rather than necessarily the words that I have to remember. So that was one area I'm like, I'm going to do that. And then when I started doing that, like, that was a win, and that was like super exciting. And then I just felt like there's new life breathed into like what I was doing. And then I was like, okay, what are some other areas? Like, for me, it's like, again, a lot of technical, I kind of geek out over like getting a band on a click and tracks and in-ears and improving technical aspects. Yeah, you notice, like I just love that stuff. And even I think today in even smaller churches, like you can do these things one step at a time, even on a smaller budget. Like you can really focus on like, how can I make this the best possible ministry that I can, given our resources and our size. And then another area too was like, how can I just become a better pastor of my congregation during worship? And like, I had a mentor tell me like, I think you need to engage the congregation more during your worship service. Like you got the music side down and all that like pretty well, but I think for you like to kind of take it to the next level as a leader would be, how can you just have those moments in between songs to speak and pray and just engage the congregation. That was another area that I focused on to try to achieve a win. And it's really cool because I began to realize like there's some external factors that like I cannot change about the situation in the church and stuff like that. But then there's a lot of like things, internal factors, I guess you could say, or challenges that especially when it comes to my personal development and growth as a worship leader, that I can experience wins in other ways, and those are super life-giving. So yeah, that's such a great word, and in all different, whatever I think these wins look different in whatever church you're in, whatever ministry you're in, whoever you are. Like you just have to take some time to reflect on it and figure out how can you really, how can you find some wins in your context.
Yeah, I was thinking of, I think this whole idea of clarifying a win, I'm not sure what book it came from. It might have been Deep and Wide by Andy Stanley, but it might have been something else. But I think it was Andy Stanley talking about clarifying the win. And the one thing that he was talking about was how like the win has to be something that you can control, which is like what you were saying. Like, what can I control? Well, I can control how prepared I am. I can control the things that I can do. I can't control how many people are going to be here on Sunday. Like, that's not a certainty for me. I can do things that might contribute to that, but at the end of the day, I can't control that. So, like, your win also has to be something that you can control, and I think that's super important too.
Yeah, great stuff. Well, I think that tip number 1: embrace the intimacy, and take advantage of the intimacy created in a small environment. That's a great one to start off with. Let's move on. What other tips do you have for us?
Yeah, well, number 2 is actually embrace the intimacy. So,
oh, sorry.
I
think I might have messed up some of the
they're
notes
both,
in here.
They're
First
both,
one's season.
Yes,
right?
embrace the season. We're all about embracing here. If I could give you a hug over this video call, I would, because we're all about embracing.
Yeah. So okay, number 1, embrace season. Okay. Number 2. Okay.
Is embrace the intimacy.
All right.
I'm gonna subtitle this one #Kumbaya moment. All right. So, embracing the intimacy is all about recognizing your unique advantage as a small church leader of intimacy. And you probably know what I'm talking about. There's a difference between leading like a room of 50 people in worship and leading a room of 1,000 people. And I've done both before. And there's just something intimate about leading that smaller group of people that you just don't quite get with that bigger group, at least from my experience. And I think back to this one time in high school where we were all sitting around in homeroom. Some kid had brought his guitar in, and I picked up this guitar and I started playing, and I'm ashamed to admit it, but I started playing I Want It That Way by the Backstreet Boys. Tell me why ain't nothing. Yeah, that one. And everybody started singing along. And if I was thinking, if I had gotten like on this stage at school and done that in front of the whole school of like, I don't know how many people we had at school, but like 2,000 people would have been like, look at this guy up here. Like, he's an idiot because he's playing a Backstreet Boys song. But like, because it was that smaller, intimate setting, things were different and people liked it. So like, it goes the same way for church. Like, you can afford to take some different risks, almost, I think is a way to look at it, whenever you're in that smaller environment. And just another quick example, like, that might be more applicable to people is this idea of like sitting around a campfire. And you have that one friend who thinks that he knows how to play the guitar, but he doesn't really know how to play the guitar. And he's like banging out all these chords. And like, nobody's sitting there thinking, man, this guy's really horrible at guitar. They're just like sitting there enjoying the intimacy of the moment. And I think that ultimately that's what people long for. And so I hope that small church worship leaders can recognize the advantage of that intimacy and play to that strength. And it no longer means that you've lost because you're not leading as many people, or maybe you're just leading by yourself with an acoustic guitar, but like, you can actually own that moment and play to that strength of the intimacy that it creates.
Yeah. Because even as your church grows, it's like you start to experience the kind of the challenge of like, oh man, how do we make this more intimate and personal? Like, I know there are larger churches having that conversation, it's like, we don't want to become just this like huge, massive gathering where people can come in and come out and be completely anonymous. Like, that's sure, they can probably get a lot from the worship gathering still, but there's a lot to say for that human intimacy that can happen in a smaller context. So that's a great reminder. Yeah. All right, let's move on to number 3.
All right, number 3 is a plea to stop the comparison.
Oh,
you find yourself being a comparer, Jake?
It's easy to do sometimes. Yeah.
So there's this quote flashed across my Instagram, and it was from Theodore Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt is what I'd call him today if I saw him in person. And it is, comparison is the thief of joy. And maybe you've heard that before. Comparison is the thief of joy.
So true.
And I find that to be so true for especially worship leaders in a small church. And I have the hardest time with that, where I'm constantly comparing. Like, we're always comparing things. Like, man, that church has like 5 more people on the worship team, or they've got a digital board, or they've got in-ears, or they've got a full-time drummer, or they've got a keyboard player, they got wireless mics, or whatever it is. Like, we love to compare things, and we compare gear and the amount of songs that we get to lead on Sunday, like all these things. But comparison is the thief of joy, because when we focus all of our energy on comparison, we tend to focus only on what we don't have and not what we do have. And I think if we'd focus more on what we do have, like, we would start leading a lot better, which is why this is a tip. So what are your thoughts on comparison?
Dude, this is like, I mean, it's a daily battle, whether in any area of life. Like, I kind of have my hand in a lot of things, like whether it's worship leading. So I'm at a small church plant. So yeah, I look at the bigger church ministries and I'm like, I wish I could lead worship at a church of like, thousands of people and stuff. And I, cause I have friends who do, and it's just like, it's like it's hard not to compare that. I do a lot of video work, so it's hard to not compare myself creatively to other like filmmakers out there. And then also like, just this whole online business thing that I'm doing here with Churchfront. It's easy for me to compare myself with other online businesses out there. It's just constant constant battle. And I guess I wanted to ask you, like, what are some ways that you found to combat this constant, like, or desire to compare yourself, especially within kind of this worship ministry context?
Yeah. I think one of the things is to kind of, like, I think comparison can be a good thing when we do it in the right way. And so as long as we're not focusing on what we don't have, but like, what can we do? Like, what can I learn from this comparison? Because I consider myself a student of leading worship. Like, I'm always watching churches' live streams, seeing how different people do different things. So I think that there's actually a lot of good that can come to comparison if we put it in the right mindset, where like I'm watching a church do a certain song and like I'm thinking, whoa, we don't do that song at our church and maybe we can't pull that off, but like what aspect of that can I incorporate into my worship leading so that it becomes better? So I think there is like a positive side to comparison.
Dude, I agree. Like I whenever I do find myself comparing myself to other people, to get myself out of that funk, I need to be like, what can I actually, obviously if I'm comparing myself, I think there's something here that they're doing really well, or there's something really great happening in their context that's maybe not happening in my context, but like, what can I learn from that? What practical things can I take away from it and then apply it to what I'm doing? Like, and I think having that posture of a learner rather than being just like a navel gazer, and getting bitter, I mean, it's always going to be a better route to take. And I think with worship leading in our worship ministries, if there's like a church in your area that is like the happening place, and it's always easier to compare yourself of like, well, I wish we could be like this church. They have like this many people, or their worship band like has like so many amazing professional volunteers, and their graphics and creative are amazing, whatever. If you find yourself saying that about some church, if you want to get over the comparison, you need to start contacting whoever is in charge over there and just get to know them and treat them to a coffee and pick their brain and just try to be a learner from them. And I think that's for me what I found to be like a really great way to combat like the negative side of comparison. Because like you said, I think there's both the positive that you'll try to learn something from people you're comparing yourself to, or there's a negative side where you'll just be bitter and kind of navel gaze and be like, oh, woe is me. I'm not cool or amazing or hip or whatever in my ministry. So,
yeah. And I think, like when it comes to contacting people like that, like for some reason in our mind, we think like, oh, they're never going to want to talk to me. But every time I've reached out to somebody like that, like they've been so nice and so helpful. And all it took was me saying, hey, I'd love to like talk to you for 10, 15 minutes, even if that's all it is. And you learn so much from that experience. Yep. So I think that's valuable. And then you're like, stop comparing and you start learning, which is the difference.
Yep. Yeah. So I'd say, if comparison is an issue for folks, I mean, speaking from my own experience, it's just be proactive about learning, and then just actually just go ahead and build relationships with people that you feel like you're comparing yourself to. Yeah.
And then I think too, this goes back to embracing the season, and it's all about patience and like waiting. And I think back to my story when I was 13 years old and I didn't know how to play an instrument or anything. Like I could have compared myself to just even my family and said like, man, they've got all that, like they know how to play that and they can lead worship in that way. But like I took it upon myself to sit in my room and play guitar for 3 to 4 hours once I got a guitar. Like that's what I could focus on and that's what I could do. And it took, like it didn't happen like that week. Like I didn't join the worship team that week. I had to be patient. So I think patience plays a huge part into it too.
Yeah. Yeah. And comparison just can, one more thought is like, it can be a deadly cycle. Like you can either decide to, again, be proactive and take action if you're not happy about where you are, and try to develop whatever skills or again, work on the things that you can control, or you can just keep comparing and get basically nowhere in life. So
exactly.
Yeah.
I think that's the main tip for this session is to focus on what you can control. And do something about it. It seems like where everything's headed.
Pretty good tip. Yeah. So cool. Let's move on.
Yeah, number 4 is to provide the structure for when you do grow. So, in my mind, if we're truly fulfilling the purpose of the church, which is to go outside of the church and tell people about Jesus, then ultimately we're going to grow. And in the same vein, like, we need to be prepared for that. And I think that's true for our worship team too. Like, if you want your worship team to grow, if you want to go from having 3 people, 5 people, whatever you have now, to 20 people where you have weekly rotations, part of that is putting the process in place before you actually get there so that you're ready for it. So we got to ask the question, like, what's that look like? Like, what's your process for adding somebody to the team that you have? And how are you training new people? And how are you disseminating the information? Like, these are the songs that we're doing this week. Or how do you choose who's going to lead on a Sunday? Like, it's super important to have those things down before the time comes where you need them. So that way the process just goes effortlessly. And so thinking about those, like, what's your process for adding someone to the team? What would you say for your team, Jake? Do you have a process for that?
What would I say for my team? Yeah, I mean, there's variety of ways you can do it. But you're right. You have to come up with a process. I think it looks different, but I would say making sure that, like, if someone's like, hey, I'm ready to be on your team. We're at a small church plant, so I haven't had flocks of people coming to ask me yet. But you're right. I need to be ready for that. And I think, for me, the process is great. I need you to record yourself playing a song or singing a song, and just send me that video file. And then from there, we'll move on. And then, okay, great. If that works, if you're in a place, that you have the competency to be a part of the band, then we're going to meet one-on-one, and you're going to basically do the same thing with me, but in person. And then I'm also going to kind of interview you about, like, why you feel called to be a part of the worship band, and ask basic questions about your faith and just where you're at with commitment levels in the church. And then, go from there. Hopefully by the time we have that in-person meeting, like, it's kind of pretty clear whether this person is going to be a good fit or not. But that's a very simple structure. It's like, have kind of this online vetting, and then have the in-person vetting process, and then be like, okay, now you need to go into planning center. You need to block out dates, so I have an idea of your availability, and smooth out that process of taking someone as a basically a new recruit for the band. And you're right. It's like all organizations, hopefully your church is going to grow. So, I mean, these are tips we're sharing about being in a small church, but hopefully you're a case where you are reaching more people in your community, and that translates into to growth, both for your church at large and your ministry. And in order to really grow in a healthy way, you just have to build these systems to scale out. So build systems for recruitment for your band, but then also build systems to stay organized to week basis. For me, right now, what that looks like is having a really great organized Planning Center account. I use Planning Center for everything, and I recommend all worship leaders to use it if you can swing it, because I think it's the best software for that. But I also, even once you have the software, it's still a lot of consistent work you have to put in to keep it organized, so that on a week-to-week basis, once I've created a song in Planning Center, the charts and the MP3 files to go with it, like, it's pretty much done, and I can transpose it as I need to down the road. But maybe the first week, it's like this song this week we're introducing the song Miracles by Jesus Culture to our church, and I had to create the chart. I had to create I have the chart, I have the MP3 file, then I have an MP3 file that contains the click and cues, so they know what it's going to sound like with the backing tracks. Takes me maybe like a half hour to do that for one song, but then once it's done, in future weeks, it takes me about 3 seconds to drag it into a Planning Center plan. So as your song library grows, you need to keep that organized. And then also, the other thing I was thinking of is just like keeping your teams organized, and like scheduling and stuff like that, keeping track of who does what, and so that on a week-to-week basis, you're not like trying to like figure out like, oh, who needs to sing or play this week, or who can do this or that. Like, creating systems is such an important part of scaling and growing anything. So.
Yeah, 100%. I was thinking too, like, how my process has changed over the years as I've seen the church grow. Like, I started in a church plant, and there were probably like 35 people there, maybe, and we're at like 100 people roughly now. So like, even, I mean, that's only a 65 person change, but like, even in that, like,
you just tripled the size of your church, though.
Hey, you got it. Yeah. Like, but even in that growth of tripling the size of our church, like, the process has changed. Like, whenever I first started, it was me, another guy playing acoustic, and my brother on bass. That was our worship team. And like, for us to add somebody else to that worship team, it didn't just magically happen. Like, we had that system in place of, hey, do you want to come join us at worship team practice so you can see what it's about? And then eventually they moved into a role where they were able to lead on Sunday. But like, if we didn't have that system set up and it was just like, come lead with us on Sunday sometime, which I've been a part of churches that have done that in the past, like, that's not going to help build the team. So you got to have those systems in place that make it clear for people what they're supposed to do. And then they're going to want to join the worship team.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so we have one more final tip.
Yes, number 5. This is like the most practical of all of them, and I think the most important. And it's how to put your songs in the right keys.
So you're saying that like the songs don't come in the right keys, like a Chris Tomlin album. I shouldn't just like sing "How Great Is Our God" in the same key as Chris Tomlin does. He cuts it on the album.
If you can, I'd love to hear that. But yes, I think that definitely album keys are different than congregational keys. So this is like super practical tip, and I learned this whenever I was serving as that praise team coordinator when I was 17. There was another music person at the church at the time, and we sat down together, and she like explained this process to me. And I don't know if I was arrogant or too proud, probably, and thought I knew a better way, but I didn't really pay attention when she told me. So a couple years later, I rediscovered this process, and I was, the whole time leading worship, I was thinking like, worship leading is going well, but it doesn't seem like people are singing like they should be. Like, what's the problem? And I realized that they couldn't sing along with me because the songs weren't in the right key. And I think a lot of people have the problem, from what I've noticed, that they sing their songs way too high. For me, you might be able to tell from my voice, mine was actually the opposite, where I was singing way too low because I'm a bass. So like, finding that perfect range is so important. So let me take you step by step, my process of putting a song in a singable key. And I'm excited.
I'm excited about this.
Yeah, good. I'm going to talk through this on a guitar, from like a guitar perspective, because that's my preferred instrument. But you can do this on any melodic instrument, like a guitar, obviously, a bass, a keyboard, a penny whistle, whatever has a melodic tone. All right. So first of all,
a penny whistle for those of you tuning in from Ireland or wherever they live.
So first of all, you've got to find the melody on your instrument. So usually I'll sit down with my guitar, start playing through the chords. It doesn't really matter what key you start in, just something that you can play the song in. So I'll play the chords, get the melody in my head, and then start playing it like note by note on the guitar. And that takes some time. As you do it more, you'll get more comfortable with doing that, and the process will go faster. So I play the melody on my guitar, and I note like the range of the song. So where's the highest note of the song and where's the lowest note of the song? And that's super important, because after you figure out the range of the song, the highest note and the lowest note, then you take that and you've got to fit it into this rule that I'm about to tell you. And the rule is that the average vocal range of a person in your congregation is between a low B flat note and a high E flat note. So people much smarter than me have figured that out, and I trust them, and I found it to be true. So
You can also just tell by if I'm an average singer, how high can I sing that sounds good, and how low can I sing that sounds good.
Exactly.
And you shouldn't be singing songs that go outside those boundaries. But I love that. I love the B flat, low B flat, and then the high E flat. Like for me, I'm a baritone, and that's pretty much exactly my range right there.
That's perfect. So for a guitarist, the low B flat is on the first fret of the A string, and the high E flat is on the 8th fret of the G string. So if your range of your melody falls anywhere outside of that, then chances are you probably need to change the key of the song. So the next step is to change the key until you find where that melody falls within those notes. So like if you're finding that you're going way above an E flat every time you sing the chorus, then you need to back it down until it's below an E flat. And then that's the key that you should be singing it in, because that's where people can actually sing the key in.
Yep. Love it. Yeah, sometimes I even try to keep it. Usually for me, it's instead of the high E flat, I usually do the high D, because I feel like that's kind of another good marker. Because if you think about like, I mean, my goal when I'm trying to pick keys is like most people don't have the musical intuition to sing harmonies in case if they can't pick up the melody. So like, how can I make it so that both a guy and a girl can sing the melody in a comfortable range? And the sad part is that most worship songs, like the way they're recorded and put on the album, they're put on the album to sell, right? That's kind of the goal of producing albums, is like it's an industry. They need to sell albums and get music out there for people to listen to, and then for us to sing in churches. But it doesn't really translate well to singing in churches, because these albums are cut for like people with really good like high tenor voices, like a Chris Tomlin, Matt Crocker with Hillsong, Jad, and Joel Houston. I think he's more of a baritone voice. But like, and then like the fad kind of with female led songs lately has been like, you've got to be a super alto, right? And like, super 100%. Altos and tenors, their ranges are pretty much interchangeable. Like I feel like Chris Tomlin could sing in the same range as like Lauren Daigle or something like that. It's just not super comfortable. It's a lot of those songs, especially in the choruses, hang out above that E flat over middle C. And it's just like painful for people to try to sing along to that. So dude, I think this is a great tip. And especially if you're trying to just create a more engaging worship environment and getting people to participate. I think in worship, step one for participation, as like your duty as a worship leader, is to get mouths moving and singing. Like, let's not even worry about like raising hands, clapping hands, stuff like that. I think just getting people to sing is like a very good win to have, talking about wins that we had earlier. And like even in smaller churches these days, I think there is a struggle because folks aren't thinking through the vocal ranges like the way you just described it. And then people just aren't singing very much. So
right. Yeah, that's so true. And I've seen that like journey in my church from when I had no idea about that rule to when I actually implemented it. Like just the participation singing wise that I got was like just amazing. And like I said, I always watch different churches online, and the one thing that I always critique is the keys of their songs. And like I'll be watching someone leading and I'm like, this song sounds way too high to me. And they'll show a shot of the congregation and like people are just standing there. Yeah. And I was watching a particular church a couple weeks ago where they did that. They sang one song, it was super high, nobody was singing along. Then they actually did a song that was in like a good key, and you just saw like everybody just started participating, like from like 25% participation to like 95% participation. So just like that's how important song keys are, and I don't think we always think about that.
Yeah, it's a great reminder. All five of these things that we talked about today are such a great reminder. Embrace the season you're in. Embrace the intimacy of being in a smaller church. Stop the comparison. I plead to stop the comparison. And I'm preaching to myself there, and I appreciate that reminder. Provide structure for when you grow, so you're not like dealing with a bunch of headaches and disorganization and frustration there. And then put your songs in the right key. Those are five awesome tips for leading worship in a small church. Spencer, if folks want to get a regular dose of all this great content that you have to share about worship leading, what's the best way for them to do that?
Right now, I'm focused pretty much on Instagram. So if you follow me at Instagram at Leading Worship Well, I put a new post up every day, super practical tips for helping you lead worship well.
Awesome. Yeah, I love those like long form captions that you have. I mean, they're long, but they're not, it takes like, I don't know, less than 60 seconds to read or something like that, but it's like mini blog posts. And I see folks like who are doing it like, I mean, I might model that idea off of you.
Go for it, yeah.
the model being the Christian word for steal that idea from you. I was just talking to Brady Shear about that actually earlier today, but he does the same thing. Like, it's cool, like having the image of whatever it is and then having like this little mini blog post in the caption. It's just a great way to consume content. So guys, make sure you're listening to this. If this was at all helpful to you, which I'm pretty sure it was helpful to me. Go to Leading Worship Well, just search that on Instagram. You'll see Spencer there, and follow his stuff. Engage with him too. You're great. Spencer's great at engaging in the comments if you ever have questions, or shoot him a DM or anything like that as well. So Spencer, thank you so much. Thank you for all you're doing to help equip worship leaders in smaller ministry contexts. Like you said, 85% of churches are less than 200 people. That means 85% of probably the listeners to this podcast are in that exact context right now. And I know what we shared today will be super helpful. I'm gonna go back and apply this to my own ministry. Thanks, bro.
Awesome, man. Thanks.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Spencer Cormany of Leading Worship Well. Make sure you go follow him on Instagram, linked below this video. Follow Churchfront on Instagram as well, linked below this video. If you're looking for some great resources for your worship ministry, you should download my Worship Leading Toolkit. It's linked below this video as well. It has my complete list of all my favorite software, gear, and other resources that I'm using on a regular basis at Mission Lakewood, where I'm currently leading worship at. And at my church, we're a smaller church. We're not even 100 people yet. We're a brand new church plant. And I just wanted to compile a list of all of my favorite tools and give them to you, so you have one convenient place where you can find inspiration and also find the links to where you can get these things. Thanks so much for watching. Make sure you subscribe to the Churchfront channel and hit that notification bell so you receive all of our latest content to help you grow yourself and grow your church.